Hello again, everybody, and hello to everybody in Nipawa. It's good to be with you. Rylan spoke in Nipawa last week for the first time. Owen blessed us here with a great sermon. Why don't we just express our appreciation to those guys for serving us that way? I got to be in kids' church last week, which was really funny, really cute, and the kids were great too. It's terrible stuff. Okay, I got to be in kids' church. It was funny and cute. I realized that in that context, I'm known not as Pastor Nathan. I'm known by a different name. Twice, little hands went up, and I was like, yes. And they said, Mr. Tamara. It was two different age categories. But I love the people that are serving there. I got to work with James Cool, Mark A. Chan, Luke Irwin, and somebody else in there. Steve Weeb. And yeah, it was awesome to see these young dads investing into everybody's kids. And not just like babysitting, diving in and getting prayer requests, because little hearts have hurts and longings as well. And it was just really encouraging to see. So well done there, and that same stuff's happening in Nipawa as well. We are partway through this series called Happy, which is looking at Jesus' biggest extended body of teachings, coming at it saying, this is him teaching us how to flourish as a human being. He's saying if we put his yoke, his body of teaching on us, if we obey him, if we follow him, we are going to flourish, and he will take us on the path to what it means to be blessed, what it means to be happy. And first, we looked at how everybody is blessed. He has the opportunity for blessing. He says, you're blessed even if, and then he gives you all these conditions that seem on the surface like you're not blessed, but he comes and says, yeah, you actually are. And then last week, he gives an identity. He says, we are salt and light. We are to be like a city shining on a hill. So he's talked about our acceptance. He's talked about our identity. And here he's going to go in a different direction. And it seems like he's just going to be talking about himself. But what we're going to see is that in him talking about himself, in just these two verses we're going to look at, he's actually talking about all of us, although we may fall into one of two categories. The first category, what he's saying will apply to, will be if you, as somebody who follows Jesus, are wondering to yourself, how do I actually be salt and light? When there's an off-color joke in the staff room at work, how do I actually be salt and light? When I'm angry with my kids, how do I be salt and light? In my house church, when we're praying, how do I be salt and light? What does it actually mean? How do I actually behave? What should this change about what I'm currently doing that would make me salt and light? Because I genuinely want to bring the presence of Jesus to places. I just sometimes don't know how, aside from just being a pest to people. So how do I do this better? How do I, as salt and light, intersect with somebody's life in a way that brings Jesus to it? First category of person. Second is somebody who is wondering about where their life might actually intersect with Jesus's. So maybe you've been coming to the Happy series. Somebody invited you 3 or 4 weeks ago and you came and you quite enjoyed it and you're continuing to come. Maybe you've bought a Bible, but you're wondering, how does this actually come together? Where does his life and, my life and Jesus' life come together in any meaningful way? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Both of those people's needs are addressed by what Jesus says in these next two verses, but you don't actually see it on the surface. So let's read the verses and then we'll start to see how it speaks to those of us who want to be salt and light, aren't sure how, and those of us who want to connect with Jesus maybe for the first time meaningfully and aren't sure what that looks like. Matthew 5:17. Jesus says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. The law is the first 5 books of what we call as Christians the Old Testament. It's the only Bible Jesus would have had, because the stories about Jesus aren't in the Bible yet as Jesus is living them. Nor are the reflections about Jesus' life that are written in the last bit of the New Testament, they're not there yet either, because Jesus is living it out. Jesus looks at the law, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and that's a lot of laws. It's real detailed stuff about how to live your life, what to do, what not to do, foods to eat, foods not to eat, the kind of people you can hang around with, the kind of people you should not hang around with, the kind of people you should marry, the kind of people you shouldn't marry, what to do when you have this sort of a wound, what to do when you have that sort of a wound, justice laws, all this kind of stuff. It's really, really extended and precise. And the Jewish people, the faithful ones, followed that law as best as they could, almost to the letter. In fact, they wanted to follow it to the letter, so they'd actually put a bit of a fence around the law so they didn't get close to breaking it, right? Like if the speed limit is 50, you're going to set your cruise at 40 so you don't even get close. That kind of idea. The law is 50, but your personal take on it is 40 so that you don't break it. Jesus has a bit of a reputation, it would seem, for abolishing the law. And you can see why he would have this. Because he does stuff on the Sabbath that the law says you're not supposed to do. He hangs around with people that the law says you're not supposed to hang around with. He touches people that the law says don't touch them or you're going to become unclean. So there's this reputation he has for doing exactly that, abolishing the law. And then the prophets is just a group of people that are reflecting on the law, telling Israel, the reason you're in this mess is you forgot about the law. So let's tune up ourselves, let's be faithful to the law, then things will go better for us. Or else, if they were obeying the law, the prophets would point out the reason it's going so good is because of your obedience. So there's people Jesus is talking to who assume that he's coming up with something entirely new. And he says, no, not entirely new. I've not come to abolish them all, but to fulfill them. And then the next verse, for I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Those are the only two verses we need for today. I want to talk about the word fulfill, what it means and what it doesn't mean. When Jesus comes along and he says, I'm here to fulfill it, what he doesn't mean is they're all good, right? To fulfill something, to extend it, to complete it, to take it to the next level, to be the next chapter, all these things have connotations of the word fulfill. He doesn't come and say, you're okay as you are. Here to give you the Jesus step sign of approval based on all of your cultural experiences and all your personal experiences. That's not fulfill. But fulfill is also different than saying, that was all useless and that was all wrong. That was a waste of time. You're a bunch of lost, pagan Jews, and I'm here to show you a better way. Somewhere between you're okay and don't have to change anything, the pat on the head, the acceptance of everything in their story, and wrong, useless, is the word fulfill. So there's going to be continuity with the story that's gone before, but there's going to be changes. And we'll get into that next week. Jesus over and over in the next block of teaching says, you have heard it said, and then he gives an example of one of the laws, do not murder, but I say to you, now what he's saying there is not, that doesn't apply anymore. Now you can murder, I've got a new law. No, he's saying there's a continuation of what you knew and what you felt was important. The impulses that were inside you already, I'm just going to take them a little bit further, I'm going to complete them. So it's not just about not murdering somebody. I say to you, don't even be angry. Fulfill is to take somebody's story and to find the good in it, leave the bad behind. Almost, if you were trying to describe it, you might say you're supposed to be salt and light. Oh, well, Jesus did say that. Preserve what's there, add flavor, shine light on some of the things that are there so that they can be either exposed or illuminated. So you come along, if you're being like Jesus, and that's really what you're aiming for. This is super important because Jesus wants to give everybody that you come across and you a new revelation. And by that I mean he has something new for you to walk into, a next chapter for you, but he can't give it to you if it doesn't somehow connect with something you already know. You can't make a leap to something you don't know anything about. You can't teach somebody algebra unless they already have some basic experience of how numbers work. Jesus, when he comes to a Jewish culture, he speaks Aramaic, so they would understand him. If he would have spoken a different language, it would have been useless because they don't have any prior revelation, any understanding of what he's talking about. Let's spin this into how this helps us answer the first question we have about how we're to be salt and light. To do that, we're going to look at somebody I think who did it so very good about 80 years ago. His name was E. Stanley Jones, Methodist missionary to India, and he was way ahead of his time. I've got some verses there, Judy, but just scroll ahead to the Jones quote, if you would. And so this missionary wants to share the message of Jesus, but he's been taught in a method that would have him need to come into a situation, need to come into a culture, or need to come into a workplace and find the things that are wrong, and then say, see how wrong this all is? See how broken you all are? What a mess. Read this pamphlet about Jesus, and it'll reinforce for you again how wrong you are, and then come and we'll chat, and I'll save you. So that's what he would have been mentored into. But he gets to India. Well, we'll just let him tell his story. When I first came to India, I didn't want to find anything good in it, just in case, lest there be no place for my good news. So if everybody's fine, and everybody's happy, and it's actually going better in some ways than, like Indiana where he left, what does he actually have to offer? He wants to find an absolute mess so that then the good news can speak to it. But even as he's doing that, even as he's approaching, looking for what's broken, looking for what's off, there's something going on inside of him that is uneasy with that whole way of doing things. And maybe you're uneasy with it yourself. However, I was uneasy within. I felt there was something wrong. When I got a hold of this idea of fulfillment in its full meaning, and that's in this Sermon on the Mount, I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets, I came to fulfill them. This is the text that inspired his shift in thinking. When I got a hold of that idea that Jesus comes to fulfill and not abolish, that he comes to complete and not devalue, I sighed a sigh of relief. I could be a friend to India and still hold on to my gospel. And over the years, you got to know Gandhi. He made an incredible difference and found a way to have Jesus allow our people to come to Jesus without losing the things that Jesus had already done in their lives. Now, let's spin this out a little bit. Because what I'm doing is I'm taking this little nugget from Jesus and I'm turning it into a universal principle. I'm sort of saying something like, so Jesus says this because he's talking to Jews. If he was talking to Buddhists, he would say something similar. I don't come to negate nirvana and your desire for peace, but I come as the Prince of Peace, the culmination of everything that you're already desiring. I'm the next chapter. Or if he comes to indigenous people, he looks in their traditions for the things that are already places where he's present, and he says, yeah, you have heard it said that, but I'm going to take you a little bit farther. He's going to speak their language. And a common objection to this kind of thinking is somebody saying, yeah, but he didn't. Jesus didn't come to the Chinese. Jesus didn't come to the Dakota. Jesus didn't come to the Cree. Jesus didn't come to Taiwan. And of course, the Christian response is, yes, he did. That's you. Jesus came to the Philippines when the Filipino person who's working at High Life moved next door to you. Then Jesus came to the Philippines because you, as Jesus, are to go there. Jesus came to the Dakota when you got introduced to somebody on your hockey team who's from Dakota Teepee. So you take Jesus' strategy as Jesus' way of being, and you enter into that story. And it keeps you from this obnoxious, imperialistic mindset that is so off-putting. And some of us, we don't share our faith because basically we don't know how to share it without being a pest. We had two guys coming down our driveway, our road yesterday as we wanted to head out of town. I saw them coming 4 doors down. I run inside. I'm like, hurry up, everybody. We have to go. So we're partly eluding the car because otherwise we're going to get cornered because they're going to witness to us. They're going to share their faith, and they're going to pester us. The Jesus way is not pestering. The Jesus way is to come alongside and enter somebody's story. Look for what Christ is already doing there and wait for it to emerge. That's different than praying for an opening. Oh, Lord, give me an opening so that I might say something wise. No. Your prayer is, Holy Spirit, reveal Jesus, which is what the Holy Spirit loves to do. Holy Spirit, show me what Jesus is already doing in this situation, in this culture, in this person right in front of me that I'm learning to love. And you will see it. And it feels so different. When I was 19, I was working at MDC. And there was this guy I worked with all summer. His name was Robert. He's about 20 years older than me, but we had a similar sense of humor, and we had a ton of fun together. And one of our favorite things to do was on a spring morning, load up the minivan with a bunch of the clients there and get a little bit of cash for all of them and take them out to eat and drive around. And he loved to drive around the countryside. And we drive all over the place, these dirt roads, and he was constantly stopping and digging up flowers and putting them in the back of the van so that he could plant them back in his yard. Well, we're driving all over the place all summer, and I'm just like, oh, I'm a Christian. I got to be salt and light. I need to share something with them. So I'm praying for courage. Lord, give me courage. I may never see this guy again. And finally, like the last day, I'm going back to university, and who knows where Robert's going. I have one of these painfully awkward but honestly good-hearted attempts. So I'm sitting in the passenger seat. He's driving. Parked the car. He's loaded his flowers. I go, just a second, Robert, before we go. I probably didn't put my hands like this. That would have been even worse. I don't know if I'm going to get to hang out with you again, but I've been wanting to share something really special to me that's made a big difference in my life about Jesus. And I tell him this recited, good-hearted thing, but you could see his on the way, he got suddenly very interested in the dash, right? Oh, there's a little bit of dust. Awkward. Now, that's me praying for an opening and then forcing one. What if I had prayed, Holy Spirit, show me what Jesus is already doing in the life of Robert? Maybe something would have happened around the flowers. I'd have asked some questions about flowers. Why do you like them? What do they remind you of? Who got you into that? Jesus talks about flowers pretty powerfully later on in the Sermon on the Mount. Who knows? Maybe that would have overlapped. Maybe the flowers, the beauty he was trying to create in his yard came from, there's just a different way to go about it. I got a little bit better at that over the years. We had a young woman in our house about 10 years ago, back when a book called The Secret was like a huge deal. So the way that a lot of Christians were coming at this was, The Secret's this idea that if you can just get this special knowledge, like a key to reality, and understand how it works, then you'll get this incredible momentum and get to move forward, is basically the gist of it as I understand it. So she's really into this. It's like the power of positive thinking to the power of 10, and there's good things happening because generally when you're thinking good thoughts, you're a happier person, right? So there's some good stuff happening. And I'm ready to dive in on this is new agey. This is just not of Jesus. This is dangerous. You're giving the enemy a foot, like all this kind of stuff. But I'm a little farther along about being salt and light, and I'm praying, Holy Spirit, show me what you're doing here. And we end up having a conversation about secrets. And wouldn't it be cool if there is this secret about how reality works? Wouldn't it be way better to know the one who knew the secret first? Wouldn't it be better to know the one who gave the secret, the one who revealed the secret? Well, in Mark, Jesus is always keeping secrets, saying, don't tell them this, don't tell them that. And so, if you had a choice between hearing a secret and knowing the person who came up with it, you'd probably want to go a little higher up the chain, yes? And so she joined our church, and off we go. Because Jesus is the fulfillment of every single story. This is the claim that he makes here. Now, he makes it specifically to the Jewish people because that's who he's talking to. But he is the capstone, the last piece of every single puzzle. So let's look at how this might have changed some of our cultural situation here in Canada if we as white Christians had come at it the way Jesus here describes, not to abolish but to fulfill. Now, it's still a bit controversial because to fulfill, remember, is not to say that's just perfect how it is, but nor is it to say all wrong. So the Jesus way is to find the middle, and so you can risk upsetting people on both sides, but that didn't seem to worry Jesus too much. I've been reading and trying to learn about some of the traditions of some of our First Nations friends, and did a bunch of reading and conversations with people about what's called the Sundance. And at least part of the Sundance involves the piercing of flesh for the good of the community. You bleed so they don't have to. You take the sins of the community upon yourself. And in 1984, one of the few white people who was invited to witness this ceremony wrote about it in the Washington Post. And I'm going to describe a bit of it to you. Actually, I'll read it. So he's writing here in 1984 about this ceremony, one part of this very complex ceremony that I'm not going to be able to do justice to, but can hopefully give you enough of it to understand some of where we want to go. It says, 2 men, suspended by ropes pinned to the flesh above their shoulder blades, were hanging 6 feet over the ground. Dark blood trickled down their backs. Their long glossy hair gleamed like a raven's wing. Each man held 2 eagle feather, which he flapped urgently. Blood for blood, your blood for mine, our blood for the people. At the pitch of their suffering, with the metaphoric grace of poets, they fused the elements of their harsh lives into luminous wholes. This is powerful country, ageless and unspoiled, redolent with magic, strong as a buffalo heart. So I don't know if this guy's a Christian or not, but he's paving a bit of a way here, I think, for us to engage with this sort of thing. Does any Christian in the room see some of the powerful connection points here? But the way that we did it was to outlaw it. Not allowed to do that anymore. Wrong. Now let me ask you this. If somebody who has been through a Sundance ceremony, who has had their flesh pierced for the good of their community, who's taken the sins of the community onto themselves, comes across a passage like this in Hebrews, in the Jesus story, who does it mean more to? The person who has seen that and lived that story, or the person like me who every Wednesday night for his first 8 years had a cup of juice and a cracker, and now every fourth Sunday has a cup of a juice and a cracker? And I don't say that to demean it. I'm just comparing these two. Let's read this text in Hebrews. Day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when this priest, Jesus, had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. And since that time, he waits for his enemies to be made his footstool. For by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. So Jesus comes across folks who are celebrating a ceremony, involved in a ceremony, performing the ceremony of the Sundance. And he comes not nor carry on, but to fulfill it. So there is something powerful happening in your heart as a Sundancer that has you grasp the nature of reality in ways that are so profound and deeply, deeply moving and even beautiful, that you would know that without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness for sins. that you would have the courage to stand in the gap for your community. Greater love has nobody than the ones that lay down their life for their friends. There's a powerful entering into the story. And then there's a taking on himself of the completion of it in the way that only he can. And he just does this everywhere and all the time. That's what it means to be salt and light. You go in, you love somebody, you walk alongside them, you pray to see what Jesus is doing, and then you speak those words about what he's doing. You might say, well, that takes so long. It took Jesus 32 years to live the Jewish story. It's worth thinking about. Besides, if you love somebody, you really don't mind spending time with them and hearing about their life, right? It's this weird, got to get another convert mentality that almost takes us away from the way of Jesus. So we want to be salt and we want to be light, and you can do that because you don't need special words. You just need to make friends and ask questions and pray, Holy Spirit, show me what Jesus is doing, and Jesus will show you. That's helpful for those of us who want to know how to be salt and light. But what about for those of us who are wondering how our story will intersect with Jesus's? Well, it's much the same. Jesus will come alongside you, and he will complete your story. And in the Bible, he does that in a couple places. So he's walking down the road with some people, and he's got the Bible in front of him, so to speak, because he's telling them how the law and the prophets point to him. So their story is the law and the prophets. And they're going down the road, and Jesus is explaining the law and the prophets actually point to me. And as Jesus is entering into their story, and so think of that as that's what happens in a sermon. Jesus is entering into your story. That's what happens when you read the Bible. Jesus is entering into your story. That's what happens when you sing or just even listen to the rest of us sing. Jesus is entering into your story. In the Bible, when that happens to somebody, they express it this way. They marvel and say, surely my heart was warm within me. So there was some sort of awakening inside of them when Jesus got near enough to their story to begin to intersect it, enough so that they began to pay attention. Another place gives us an indication of what it feels like is after Jesus talks to a woman at a well. She's got a real messed up life, and he enters into her story. And she goes to tell her friends, and she uses this great phrase. She says, come and let me show you somebody who told me everything about myself. Come and let me show you somebody who knew everything about me. So probably the most common way that I have heard those two sentiments expressed in this room when Jesus' story intersects with your story for the first time is along these lines. Nobody really says my heart was strangely warm within me or come meet a man who told me everything about myself, but they express the same sentiment this way. They'll say, it was like that song was written just for me. Or it was like he was talking just to me. Or it's like she was talking just to me. But that's not true. They're not talking to you. Jesus is. And so you do need to pay attention to that. And you need to celebrate it. Because it's him coming to your story and saying, I see all these things that are awesome and incredible. The ways you've been faithful when you didn't even know there was someone to be faithful to. The things I'm so proud of you for already, the battles you've overcome, the temptation you've resisted, but you're not okay as you are. Love you to pieces, proud of you, but there's a better way. And it's me. He does not come to invalidate your life. He comes to draw you into his life, finding the things that you and he already have in common and then drawing you towards himself. That's basically what we know as friendship, right? This is why we love him, because he's a friend of sinners. He comes and he speaks uniquely to our story. He says, I'm not here to destroy you. There's some things that we want to put salt on and to enhance and preserve that are so good about you, but there's some things that we have to bring into the light and get rid of. But there's nothing that we can't do without my person and my presence in your life. Let's stand and let's sing this last song together.